In early July 2020, I took to eBay to sell a bunch of electronics I'd amassed in the last year and a half, as well as some that had been around for a lot longer than that. I had 4 HP DL380G7 servers that I used to use for editing and rendering video, and a couple of my own personal systems that I didn't need anymore thanks to the upgrades to the streaming and game systems freeing up components. The COVID-19 pandemic had been going on since about February, and so by this point money was starting to become tight, so even systems with sentimental value had to be sold. This included a fairly new but low-powered PC that had been bought back in mid to late 2019, which also housed the first graphics card I ever bought. What followed was 2.5 weeks of avoidance, blame shifting, and skullduggery. This is that tale. The date is July 9th, and an unnamed buyer on eBay offers £80 for the low-powered system. I reply with an offer of £90, which he agrees to, and then goes on to explain the reason he wants the PC. The reason being his son wants to play Minecraft. Being a gamer and remembering my first experience of PC video games back in the late 90s and how it felt, I sent the counter offer at £85 and told him to take the kid to McDonald's with the change. A little back and forth later and he sends an offer of £90 which I accept, then quickly change the invoice to charge only £85 for the system. So far in the negotiations I have beaten the guy down to get him to save £5. In a long back and forth conversation over the next couple of hours, I offered to install Windows 10 and get the system updated with drivers installed and things like that before I shipped it. He declined, saying he has a flash drive containing Windows already, but thanks for the offer. All fair enough. I checked if he had a keyboard and mouse. I didn't have one for sale, but I'll let him know about TechNet on Amazon and that their sets of gaming keyboards and mice tend to be good quality. I have 3 sets and I've used them for years without issue. In these messages I also inform him of how I prepare PCs to ship and clean them with isopropyl alcohol before packing. And with the virus still being a big issue at that time, I wanted to reassure him that it was taken care of. But it is just standard practice when I box things to ship. I also informed him of the well-known issue with shipping fully built PCs that sometimes during transit, the graphics card can come loose and cause some issues like not booting straight away, and asked him to check that the graphics card was seated properly when the system arrived. The fact he had a flash drive with Windows on told me he had at least a basic idea about computers and how to work on them, at least to the point of opening the side panel and checking everything was pushed in fully. But again, a standard thing to check before booting up a pre-built system that would avoid issues down the road. He thanked me again and the system was shipped the next day via UPS. The system was delivered on July 13th, but it wasn't until the next day that I heard from him again. The message stated, "The graphics card doesn't work all the time and it defaults to onboard graphics, making it unable to play games. And the screen is distorted via HDMI or any ports I use. Also the processor fan is loose and wiggles around." Going on to say, "Did you genuinely not know of the issues before you sold it to me, as it was something you mentioned might happen during delivery? Please could you help me resolve this? I don't find it particularly fair for the price I paid." Which I agree with. For that price you want a working system, but let's break down what he says is wrong here. Let's start with the easy one, the CPU fan. Now we aren't talking about a knock to a cooler here. The cooler installed is an Intel stock cooler on a G3930 dual-core CPU with a blazing fast base clock speed of 2.9 GHz and hyper-threading being a pipe dream. Not exactly a space heater of a CPU to start with, and Intel haven't figured out that plastic clips aren't the most secure mounting hardware ever. But they do the job and hold it in place to keep the CPU from lifting from the pins below it, and with a CPU that low powered, it is all you really need from the cooler. The point is that it's mounted as securely as any other stock cooler that I've ever encountered over the last 15 to 20-ish years. Moving on to his other issue, the GPU in question is a VTX AMD Radeon HD 7770X edition from 2012, featuring a massive 1GB of GDDR5 memory and a core clock of 1000 MHz. This graphics card was the first graphics card I ever bought for the first system I ever built, which was based on an AMD APU. Before that, it was pre-built all the way. To say this GPU has a lot of sentimental value to me is an understatement, and seeing it go was heartbreaking. Building the APU system and then adding the graphics card later was when I developed my love of systems and hardware, but bills still needed paying and this virus doesn't apply discounts unfortunately. So the card has been with me and has worked flawlessly since it was first installed in a system back in 2012. In relation to his message, I'd let him know about the shipping issues because it's a well-known issue that during shipping, heavier components, which graphics cards are, can jiggle and work loose. It's why system integrators now use that packing foam stuff to hold everything in, but I don't have access to that stuff, so I just gave him a heads up about a potential issue facing all systems in transit. The question was, had he checked everything was secure and pushed in fully before messaging me, and what, if any, troubleshooting steps had he taken up to this point? The assumption that it was somehow broken before shipping is also ridiculous. For the majority of this pandemic, the system has been installed at my parents' house, and my dad has been using it to remote into his work computer daily for at least 8 hours straight, with a full dual monitor setup powered by the very GPU the buyer was trying to question the integrity of. This annoyed me. So I got a drink, took a deep breath, and replied, "I'm sorry to hear that. The system was in perfect working order before shipping. One thing that may be worth checking is the BIOS. I reset the BIOS to defaults before shipping, so that if the new owner plugged into the onboard HDMI instead of the dedicated graphics card's HDMI, it would still give them an image. I would set the primary display output to be PCIe. If you've just installed Windows, I would head to the AMD site and install the graphics driver manually. As for the processor movement, Intel's mounting hardware isn't as secure as AMD's, so it's worth making sure the 4 corner pins are still pushed down all the way and rotated into place. As I said, the system works perfectly when shipped. If it didn't, I wouldn't have sold it. The components, minus graphics, are all less than a year old." Wrapping the message up with my list of troubleshooting would be: manually download and install the graphics drivers from the AMD site. Install other system drivers for the motherboard from BeerByte's site. The board is a GA-H110D3A Rev 1.0. Make sure the graphics card is seated fully and that the PCIe power cable is plugged in fully. Check the mounting of the CPU heatsink to the board. The stock Intel fan mount section moves slightly on all stock heatsinks. Again, sorry it seems to be playing up a bit, hopefully that sorts the issues. The system has run reliably since I bought it around this time last year. Now, they are the same troubleshooting steps I go through with any new system. It eliminates the possibility for issues to be software based or be because of loose hardware. After these, you know the issue is likely hardware based or user error. After this, he replied almost straight away, adding, "Okay, I will try BIOS settings in BIOS, as it detects 1 minute but not the next." So we are slowly getting more information about the problem he's having, but it's one line at a time. He goes on to add, "Unless the graphics card is set in the slot and the tower not moved, it seems to be okay. I will borrow a graphics card from a friend and make sure it's not the slot that is faulty if all else fails. I will keep checking, I just wanted to make sure it wasn't the motherboard, as be a pointless setup. Thanks for getting back to me." I replied to this with an additional thing that I forgot to mention in my first reply: Windows driver installs. When Windows installs the graphics drivers, it'll flicker the screen the same way that Nvidia and AMD driver installers will, only Windows doesn't do a good job of warning you what it's doing. You can easily miss the notification in the bottom right of the screen, especially if you've walked away from the PC whilst waiting for it to finish getting things ready on first boot up. So you come back to find your PC screen flickering, resizing, switching on and off. The first time it happened to me when Windows actually started installing graphics drivers for you, I unplugged the HDMI from the graphics card thinking it was broken and plugged into the onboard graphics, which naturally bumped my display down to 800 by 600. But then Windows uninstalled the graphics driver it was just trying to install. I assume what happened was it installed it, then when completing it looked for the same output on the graphics card it was using before starting the install, and when it couldn't find it, decided it must have messed up the installation and uninstalled it to go back to the start again. This meant the next time I restarted the PC I got the same thing happening, only this time it finished before I could panic and I understood what was going on. So I decided to let him know that the issues could just be driver installs in the background. I also went on to address the part where he said the card worked if the tower wasn't moved, by saying when the system is on, the tower shouldn't be moved anyway. He replied a few hours later, saying, "Looks like the clip holding the graphics card in place is no good. Screws don't hold it tight either. Don't know why they keep making heavy cards for systems. My old PC I built had support on its motherboard for additional dual slot cards. It is what it is, and I will have to find a way to resolve it. Got 3TB of SSD in RAID format now with some additional SATA cables, so I will bore the holes to fit slightly bigger screws in. Should hold it in place. Thanks again. This seemed to be an all is fine message, and he seemed happy enough. To get 3TB of SSDs configured in RAID on the system would have required the system to be working properly though. You aren't going to mess around configuring RAID for the system if the system isn't functional to start with, especially since the RAID would have either had to be software based or via an extra PCIe card since the motherboard itself doesn't support RAID. Either way, I left it at that and went about my business, and for the next few days, all seemed well in the world. The birds were chirping, the dogs were barking, and the rain kept the flies away so the windows could stay open all night. It wasn't until July 20th when I heard from the buyer again, only this time it was in the form of a return request. No message preceding it, no warnings, just boom, return request. The issue with this is that when a return request is opened on eBay, PayPal will drop your account into the negative by the full potential return amount. In this case, £95, meaning that you effectively can't use your PayPal account for anything at all until you add the full amount to it from your bank account to bring it back to zero, which isn't exactly a smooth process. And things didn't get much better when I read the details about the return. On eBay, I don't accept returns. This means that if a buyer changes their mind about a purchase, I don't have to take it back, even though I still tend to. But anything like damages or incorrect information in the listing is still a valid reason for a refund or return. The reason the buyer listed was arrived damaged. This is the system that he had modified and set up a RAID array on, correct? A RAID array powered by a 400 watt PSU, a power supply that is pretty much rated for the components in the system and nothing more, right? Okay then, sure it is. His message didn't help matters. Computer doesn't work properly. Seller stated graphics card needed to be checked as might come loose while in delivery. Contacted seller to provide answers, but avoids being an issue before sending, putting blame on me or the delivery. Not happy. Seller seemed genuine and honest. Bought for son's birthday. Graphics card and processor issues suspected. The next bit is the real kicker that got me mad though. Possibly sold as he wasn't clever enough to figure out issues, instead sold in good condition to insult a buyer. Would like to return item and have a full refund. So I think when he wrote that, he thought it was a message to eBay staff and I wouldn't be able to see it. It just reeked of playing up to eBay staff members in hopes of help out of a situation of your own making. Also, the request was made at 2:22 AM in the morning. I feel like he thought I wouldn't be awake at that time. Little did he know I hardly ever sleep and was very much awake at 2:22. It was 4:40 AM when I was writing this very script. Now, eBay doesn't save my messages to him sent through the return request window, but I did manage to find copies of his replies made through it as they send them in notification messages to you. My opening message was sent around 10 minutes after I'd read his message in the return request and calmed down enough to be professional. I merely asked him what the exact issues were with the system and for details about each problem, also including the explanation I gave earlier in this video about the reason I asked him to check everything was secure after delivery. And let's not forget that this is a point that in earlier messages he agrees with and started talking about graphics card weight as if to further the point about things working loose during transit. I ended it by saying there was no need for insults to be thrown around as I've been nothing but pleasant and honest with him, was my exact quote I believe. His reply came at 2:50 AM. It reads, "By the sounds of it, you had the delivery company in question before sending me the item. If I worked less and had more time to figure out the issues, I'd have sent this back the day I got it. Why would you sell an item that doesn't work properly and say it's in working order? You clearly haven't had this a year. Maybe bought parts to get it working. Processor fan doesn't fit on properly. Graphics card clip not attached properly. Works randomly. Who's being insulted? I want my money back, and you can have this back. You clearly knew there was an issue. Don't think I'll be using eBay again." Now clearly he was agitated, but why? I'm unsure. He modified the system, leaving the PSU with at most 50 watts to spare. He said he was fine with the system and had got 3 TB of SSD in RAID to work on it. I offered to install Windows and update the drivers before shipping. Would I really offer to use a Windows license on a system that doesn't work? No. Why would I? Why would anyone? I spent hours working things out with him, replied to every message he sent with the most relevant and useful information I could find. Why this man was annoyed, I have no idea. The CPU, motherboard, RAM and case were all purchased on Amazon in June 2019. All brand new components shipped from an Amazon warehouse to my front door by an Amazon delivery driver. The PSU was purchased in late January of 2020, again from Amazon specifically for this system, so I could use a 750 watt PSU that was in it for another system that was being sold, which had an i7 processor and GTX 1050 Ti in. The only part older than a year was the graphics card, but that was already made clear. In terms of shipping, I've used UPS whenever I ship a system, be it a PC or a server, as they have good tracking and, in the UK at least, good drivers. The one who works the route in my area actually knows me by name at this point, so if I didn't trust them, I don't think I'd be at that point with the driver. After this message, I asked him once again for details on the issues with the system and for images of the system before he packed it for shipping. The reason I wanted the pictures was so I could identify any issues before it arrived back at my doorstep. I'd also know how much messing around he had done inside of the system by looking at the wiring. I know what my cable management style looks like and would be able to tell if it had been messed around with, plus the fact I had pictures of the system before shipping helped. I also once again stated the truth, that the system minus the graphics card was all around a year old, and that it worked perfectly before shipping. Okay, if that is completely honest, I will do it tomorrow when I get up. I don't use eBay for this very reason. I will send pictures of the unit itself and packaging it was and will be in. I left a good review out of trust. Once again, I got no details of the actual issues. He stalled images until the next day, even though it was only 3:09 AM at the time of his reply. Nowhere near the time for bed if you're sending return requests at 2 AM, right? I don't know what his reason for not using eBay was. Maybe he doesn't like finding out that he doesn't know that much about computers from people he doesn't know. Who knows? To his credit, he did leave a good review. He left it on July 14th, a day after he had received the item and the day he claims he first tried the system only to find it not working. So why he did that, I don't know. eBay advise you to wait until you're happy with the item or issues are resolved before leaving feedback as a buyer. As a seller, you're asked to leave feedback after a transaction has completed successfully. Anyway, I reply and tell him I'm not going to be replying until the next day now, since at this point it was fast approaching 3:15 AM, and to send the images and any details about the errors he can when it's convenient for him to do so. I wish him a good evening and I crack open a bottle of beer. My phone then dings at 3:22 with yet another reply. It goes as follows. Sorry, I work nights. Only way to provide and I hate it. You saying that this computer honestly works and has no issues? I am completely bemused as this didn't work correctly the second I tried it. Not a real way to diagnose it. Seems like graphics card or processor and I'm not buying more components for it to see if it works properly. So again, progress, but this time on a human level. An apology. And a possible explanation as to why his previous messages sounded so angry. He isn't angry at me, he just hates his job. I used to know that feeling, so I can totally relate to that. The difference is, I knew when to hold back the frustration and anger, like when you're trying to convince someone your made up stories are real. He once again says the graphics card doesn't work and there's no real way of diagnosing it, even though he said the week before he was going to borrow a friend's graphics card and try that, which is a solid way to start eliminating possibilities without spending money to do so. Also, nobody asked or even implied that he should go out and buy components to see what the cause of the issue was, partially because asking him to do so would be a real dick move. But the main reason? Because the PC bloody works. Why would you encourage someone to buy new components to fix a perfectly fine PC? A few hours pass and night turns to day, when at 2:09 PM a message comes through. It reads, all in same state it was sent to me in, same condition it was when I received item. Attached were these 3 images. Lovely, aren't they? And so uninformative, except for the fact we can clearly see that the system has been fully rewired. Just look at it compared to my pre-shipping image. I'd asked for multiple pictures of the system, both back panel and a couple of internal angles. The packaging was never really a concern. I just wanted to see what had been done to my PC. Also, his message is, well, put it this way. I don't know who he's trying to convince more, me or himself. Clearly he had messed around inside the system, so it wasn't the same state it was sent to me in. Not unless 24-pin connectors can detach, reroute themselves and plug themselves back in during transit in a sealed box, or 3 terabytes of SSDs don't need power connectors anymore. The system arrived back at my front door on the rainy morning of July 27th. And when I say at my front door, I mean left on the doorstep at my front door in the pouring rain. Thanks, Royal Mail. So after propping the box up against the heater for the next 30 minutes to dry it off, since it had been outside in the rain for at least 30 minutes before I found it according to the CCTV, I finally opened the box and, just like Christmas, carefully peeled off the bubble wrap to reveal Old Faithful, back home after a huge road trip from Manchester to Somerset and back. After giving her a quick clean with the acetone, isopropyl alcohol and then polish, I opened her up and took my own advice. First, checking the graphics card was securely mounted, which involved making sure the clip was engaged since it hadn't been when returned. Then I made sure the PCIe screw holes hadn't been messed with, and they were all still as loose as any year-old £20 PC case. I went back inside and checked the CPU cooler, which was his second problem. The cooler was mounted securely with no play in the actual heatsink portion of the cooler. Everything else, the PSU, SSD, RAM, was as I left it. The cables had clearly all been unplugged and then plugged back in, easily identified in the way that the 8-pin EPS and 24-pin cables were now routed through different holes in the case. I plugged in my long HDMI cable so I could keep it on the desk for the first tests and make sure all the fans spin up, and they did. Straight into the BIOS and nothing had changed. Fan curves were all standard and fans responded to changes I made. The RAM, SSD, CPU all detected, and the BIOS was being displayed through the GPU. No issues so far. Next came the operating system launch. Turns out the SSD still had Ubuntu installed, and strangely, it hadn't been run. I install it in OEM modes so that the end user can go through the setup process as if it's a brand new system and configure it how they want. This hadn't been run, and the OEM password was still the same one I set when installing the operating system before shipping, so it wasn't a case of him reinstalling it to try and be clever. At this stage I was starting to doubt if he would have even known how. I booted into Ubuntu and nothing. No issues at all. I spent 20 minutes messing around installing and uninstalling apps, launching multiple programs at once, watching BeerByte media highlights on YouTube. The standard stuff, and not a single hiccup. So I moved on to stage 2. Windows. I stuck the flash drive in and got to work installing Windows 10. It installed without an issue, and for the hardware, what I would consider pretty fast. After 90 minutes I'd installed it twice, thanks to me first installing a very old version of Windows 10 that was already on the flash drive, and not wanting to wait for Windows Update to get it to the current release. Instead, opting to create a new flash drive with the newest release on it from Microsoft. After that though, it booted straight into Windows, did its thing installing drivers, screen flickered during graphics install, and that was it. No issues. Confused, I reached out to the buyer once more to see just what he had been doing to cause issues. The message reads as follows. Afternoon, can you please tell me exactly what the issues were with the system and how you got them to occur? I'm using the system right now to send this message, have moved and even rotated the system while powered on to try and get the graphics dropout switching issue, and cannot replicate it. The CPU cooler is installed to Intel specification. The amount of movement, wiggle room, is normal in a stock cooler, as they are designed to be a one-size-fits-all solution. I just want confirmation of the issues and how they happened or what brought them on, because if I can't replicate them, I don't think it's fair for me to be out of pocket shipping the system twice when the system is working exactly as described in the listing. Now you can probably tell by this point I was getting frustrated. I'd lifted the system up, turned it upside down, and even rotated it like a ball whilst powered on to try and get the graphics to drop out, and not even a flicker. And yes, it hurt me to do it, but I had to be sure that movement wouldn't cause the issues. The reply I got was the last communication I had with the buyer before cutting all communication with him. Hi, The issues I had on two 22-inch PC monitors are no graphics card recognised, so went into BIOS and changed settings like you said, and once had the screen fine and other times pixelated. Tried another HDMI cable, then new monitor. Also, when starting the screen went black and the PC went quiet and nothing happened. CPU fan would not fit correctly and GPU clip not holding in place properly. Since bought new from Redacted, spoke to customer service and they assured me no CPU fan should move around and no PCI lane clip should be loose. Already knew it shouldn't be that way, so cleared my mind of any doubts. Now, smarmy responses aside, the fact he's only now telling us the screen was pixelated, which technically isn't every display, meaning it could have been a simple resolution and scaling fix in Windows. He also missed out the graphics dropouts this time and brought in a new PC went quiet and nothing happened. It all just stinks of BS, and not even well manufactured BS, more the kind of BS you get from a sheep. Fictional. He fails to specify what he was doing at the time, if he was hooked up to an uninterruptible power supply, which I had asked in other messages before to try and eliminate dirty power being an issue. It all just feels very dishonest. But from all of this message, my favourite part was the last third, the part that starts "since bought new from." Now, I happen to know some people working at the company he bought a new system from, and also happen to know that they don't sell new systems. They sell systems that are new in that arrangement, but all the parts in there are used. The CPU will be from one system, the motherboard another, and the RAM a third. The best part to ship combo units of motherboard, CPU and RAM, they just cut a hole in the lid of a mismatched motherboard box and leave the cooler sticking out of the top. I'm guessing he bought a full system though, so he won't have got to witness that amazing creation. And I guess to him it is a new system as well, since he's never seen it before. But who would specifically start talking to customer support to ask questions about a previous system they had? Correct, nobody. So either he had systems with the new system as well, or more likely, he never spoke to anyone. So after this, I just moved on to the report buyer section of eBay and decided that instead of replying to him, I'd just let eBay know. They specifically have an option in reasons named falsely claimed the item wasn't as described. I added a small comment to the report that went as follows. The PC was returned after the buyer claimed graphics dropouts and a loose CPU fan were being an issue, both of which I walked the buyer through potential fixes, which basically involved making sure everything was secure inside the case after shipping. The buyer stated in a later message that they have installed more hard drives to increase the storage space and set them up in a RAID format, which can only be achieved if the system is working. A week later, they sent a return request claiming in the request that they contacted seller to provide answers but avoids being an issue before sending, later adding possibly sold as he wasn't clever enough to figure out issues. Since receiving the system, I have tried for the last 48 hours to replicate any of the issues, going as far as to ask the buyer directly what they were doing at the time the issues occurred so I could replicate them, and they are unable to provide any details at all on the errors with the system. It is clear that the buyer changed their mind after purchase and abused the returns policy as a way to get a refund. I can say that with confidence because this message is being written on the very system that was returned with no changes made to it at all. It was removed from the box, plugged in, and for the past 48 hours has run flawlessly, to the point I can write this on it now. But to wrap it all up, I refunded the buyer the next day on the 28th because eBay didn't really give me an option but to do so. It was returned as arrived damaged, so I couldn't use the system to apply any form of deduction from the refund amount for damages, and if I hadn't refunded him by the 29th, eBay would have automatically refunded the buyer in full anyway. The seller really is at a disadvantage in situations like this on eBay, but I left him with a parting gift in the comment on the refund. After spending all day trying, I can't for the life of me get the PC to misbehave. I've turned it every which way, and no graphics dropouts. I've tried Ubuntu, Windows 10 and Windows 7 to see if any misbehave, but none will. Closest I got was the screen going off for a minute during Windows standard graphics driver installation, which it doesn't warn you it's doing. Most I can think is that adding the extra SSDs may have been too much for the PSU, with it only being a 400 watt. Now at this point you may be wondering, well gee Paul, that's a great story and all, but how do I know it's not all just made up rubbish and the system wasn't actually broken? To which I reply, great question, let me show you. This here is the very system in question. The entire script for this video was written on it over the course of 4+ hours. I use it every stream to monitor the Discord and Twitch chats. I also use it to upload full streams to the Replay YouTube channel, and it's also the system I use when I want to record any Android stuff. The system is once again a key part of the setup in the office and is going to remain so. Clearly the universe wants me to keep this graphics card for a while longer, and you know what? I'm okay with that. eBay should really take a look at how they handle things like this and create an environment where sellers feel confident that when they are in the right, raising the issue to eBay will result in finding in their favour, because currently it feels very anti-seller in the process of involving eBay in decisions, with a lot of the negative impact being on the seller, having the potential to take away revenue streams for a person. As always, if you like this video, hit like and get subscribed. New videos go up every Monday, Wednesday and Friday here on YouTube. We are live over on Twitch every Monday, Wednesday and Friday at 4 PM UK time as well. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram, plus the Discord server is up, feel free to join us on that. Links to everything can be found in the description below, and that'll do it. So as always, thanks for watching, thanks for joining, and I will see you in a bit. Goodbye. Oh, that felt good. Nice to have you back, buddy. I missed you. You shut down. I'm happy with that.